Me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Colors, rights, holder, horse!
Right, up.
Thank you. If you'd gather around for a few moments, we would like now to have a short ceremony, and before we start on the food, we're going to have to let you pay for your dinner by listening to me for a few moments. And let me say that it has been indeed a wonderful gathering here that we have today. We are honored by the number of people from the 442nd that were able to join us. And at this particular time, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Frederick F.Y. Pang, who is one of our staunchest supporters while Mr. Pang was at the Department of Defense. And he continues to remain one of our mentors for everything that we try to do. And he will give us, he will call the roll of honor of those Japanese Americans that took place during World War II. Fred.
First of all, let me say that this is a great privilege and an honor for me to be invited to do this, because the highest service any citizen can offer to his or her country is in wartime. Today we honor again the bravery of the famed 100th Battalion and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. It was composed almost entirely of Japanese Americans, which became the most decorated unit in our country's military history. These brave soldiers, and I know you heard this before, but let me repeat this. These brave soldiers who answered the call of their country in war rose from the ashes of suspicion and fear, many from behind barbed wire in the internment camps, to fight with uncommon valor in 7 major campaigns during World War II. In less than 2 years, the soldiers of the 442nd received, among other awards and citations, a Congressional Medal of Honor, 52 Distinguished Service Crosses, 1 Distinguished Service Medal, 560 Silver Stars, plus 20 Oak Leaf Clusters, which are repeat awards, 22 Legions of Merit, 15 Soldiers Medals, 4,000 Bronze Stars, with 1,200 Oak Leaf Clusters, again repeat awards, 9,486 Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in battle, many of them fatal, 7 Presidential Unit Citations, 5 of them earned in a 1-month period, 2 Meritorious Unit Service Plaques, 36 Army Commendations, 87 Division Commendations, 18 decorations from Allied nations, and a special plaque of appreciation from their fellow soldiers in the lost Texas Battalion, which the 442nd shed blood to liberate. As President Truman pinned the final Presidential Unit Citation on the colors of the 442nd, he remarked, and I quote, "I can't tell you how much I appreciate the privilege of being able to show you just how much the United States thinks of what you have done. You fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you won," unquote. I think there are no more eloquent words that can describe as simply the patriotism and valor of men who wrote their deeds in blood for us. God bless them.
At this time, I would like to recognize Mr. Edward Ichiyama, who is a member of the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion, and he will be our key speaker. And I think he will also like to recognize the many friends and fellow veterans at the conclusion of his remarks.
Aloha. Thank you very much, Mr. Fujishiro. Talk about aloha, this is a little bit of aloha right here. And I want to thank Mimi Nakano, daughter of a Club 100 member. Mimi, where are you? Oh, over there. Thank you. On behalf of the Japanese American veterans of World War II, I wish to thank the Asian Pacific American Federal Heritage and Federal Affairs Council for honoring us with today's ceremony and reception. It is a privilege and honor and is much appreciated. Japanese American veterans' role in World War II may not be familiar to many of you, so if you will indulge with me, I would like to summarize various components being honored today. The Military Intelligence Service, or MIS, as they are known, included over 6,000 Japanese Americans from Hawaii, as well as the mainland, United States. Because of their language abilities, they acted as interpreters, translators, as well as undercover agents. They participated with the Allied forces in every major invasion and battles against the Japanese in the Pacific during World War II. They were assigned to the United States Army, the Navy, the Marines, Air Force, as well as loaned to the British, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, Chinese, and Indian military troops. Until recently, very little was known about the Military Intelligence Service simply because their work was classified. The Military Intelligence Service was America's secret weapon. So stated General Charles Willoughby, intelligence officer for General MacArthur during the Pacific War. They were credited with saving 1 million lives and shortening the war by 2 years. They were also known as the Yankee Samurais. The 100 Infantry Battalion enlisted personnel was composed entirely of Japanese Americans, veterans who were drafted prior to December of 1941. They preceded the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in combat in Italy and later became the 1st Battalion of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The 442, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, was formed in March of 1943, and its enlisted personnel was composed entirely of Japanese Americans from Hawaii, as well as the mainland United States. And they were all volunteers. On December the 7th, 1941, I saw Japanese planes with the instinctive Rising Sun insignia on the plane approaching Pearl Harbor 12 miles away, which was then completely ablaze. As an American citizen of Japanese ancestry, I was totally outraged, stunned, and devastated, and considered the attack by my ancestors a personal affront to my dignity and sensibilities. The impact upon the Japanese residing in Hawaii as well along the west coast of the United States was immediate. The military authorities rounded up hundreds of Japanese leaders whom they considered suspects. Individuals such as ministers, Japanese school principals, and businessmen as well as leaders of the community. These people were immediately incarcerated without due process of law. They were guilty by association. They looked like the enemies, and their loyalty was questioned. Additionally, the Japanese American soldiers who were already serving in the United States Army, those were the people that those were the veterans that actually became the 100th Infantry Battalion, were stripped of their firearms. This, ladies and gentlemen, however, was just the beginning in what was to be one of the most shameful chapters in United States history. In February of 1942, 120,000 innocent, law-abiding Japanese living in sensitive areas of the western United States, two-thirds of whom were American citizens, were incarcerated behind barbed wire detention compounds by their own government, again without due process of law. The guard towers surrounding the perimeters around the compound were manned by armed soldiers with the machine guns pointed inwards toward the inmate. Many people have said, hey, you guys were interned because of your own safety. However, if you think about it logically, how come the machine guns were pointed towards the internees rather than towards the outside? That's so much for logic. They lost their freedom and, above all, their dignity. They were incarcerated based solely on their ancestry. My wife, an American citizen, she's here somewhere, and her family were forcibly removed in the name of military expediency from their Pacific Northwest home and incarcerated, although her older brother had already volunteered for service and was serving in the United States Army in Alaska. They were allowed to take with them only what they could carry. At their camp, they were ushered in hastily constructed tar paper barracks, each family assigned a sparsely furnished area with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. These internees spent their lives in fear and uncertainty. War propaganda amplified anti-Japanese hostility. This severe cloud of suspicion and mistrust of the Japanese Americans, however, strengthened their collective resolve to create a better America for their children and for their grandchildren. During the same period, non-military Japanese Americans as myself were precluded from entering military service by the United States Elective Service, which classified us as 4Cs or enemy aliens. Ladies and gentlemen, please consider for a moment this demeaning designation, enemy aliens. We were all second or third generation American citizens, majority of whom had never stepped foot in Japan, our ancestral land. Incidentally, there was not a single documented case of treason or sabotage by the Japanese Americans living in the United States, either before, during, or after the war. Even under such demeaning circumstances, the Japanese Americans initiated a public relations campaign with military and governmental authorities to allow us to serve in the military. Consider this, that our constitutional right to bear arms for our country was denied us. Our mission was simple: to prove our loyalty to the United States government. So finally, in 1943, the authorities relented and asked for 1,500 Americans of Japanese ancestry to volunteer for military service. Instead of the anticipated 1,500, over 10,000 of us from Hawaii and many thousands from the internment camps, or what they call concentration camps, of the continental United States responded. This was an act of super patriotism and loyalty, probably unsurpassed in the history of the United States. You know, we often talk among ourselves, if we were put in concentration camps, along with our family, would we have volunteered to risk our lives and die for our country, the very country that put us behind concentration camps? But these people volunteered, and quite a few of them are here tonight. This afternoon you can see them with their caps like that. That's our uniform. That's a badge of courage. Like many of my fellow volunteers, I left a safe, well-paying defense-related job, in my case repairing Navy boats. And I wanted to serve in the United States Army, to sacrifice my life if necessary, to prove my loyalty to the United States of America. These Japanese American volunteers then formed the nucleus of the 100 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a segregated unit. This is very important, it's a segregated unit. We and the black soldiers probably were the only ones segregated during World War II. I was one of the volunteers, along with Senator Dan Inouye and many of my veterans over here with the captains. We served with distinction in the European theater of war and earned the reputation of being one of the most decorated units in the United States military history. In my personal experience, one of the more dramatic rescues of World War II occurred when the 100 and 442nd Regimental Combat Team was called upon to free men of the 1st Battalion, 141st Regiment of the 36th Texas Division. As some of you who maybe have been there heard Senator Dan, was saying that Texans were huge guys, and we little guys were there to help them. Well, we did. These soldiers, 211 of them were surrounded by the Germans for about a week without food or water in the Vosges Mountains of northeastern France near the German border. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was ordered to rescue these men at all costs. The Germans were told to hold their positions at all costs. To accomplish this rescue, which took 4 days, or probably 4 or 5 days and nights of hand-to-hand combat in the dark forest of the Vosges Mountains, we finally succeeded in rescuing these 211 men. But by doing so, the 442nd Combat Team suffered 800 casualties, close to 300 men dead, and the rest completely hospitalized or unable to proceed any further. To illustrate the rate of casualty, K Company, which was one of the lead rifle companies, started out with approximately 150 men before the push, and after the 4th or the 5th day, they had 17 men standing. That was pretty good. I Company, which along with K Company led the charge up the hill, and 8 riflemen standing. Out of 150 men, 8 men standing. George Owe, where's George Owe? My leader, he's up there. And although Giorgio and I were in the artillery, we were foreign observers then. So we knew, or we saw exactly what happened. Still today, my nightmares include the mournful, haunting sound of my comrade calling, "Mother, Mother, please help me." And as his life slowly ebbed in the cold, dark night of the Vosges Mountains of France, thousands of miles away from his home in Hawaii, his plea for help gets fainter and fainter and fainter until it stops. This comrade of mine suffered. Also in my nightmares, I see the lifeless, blood-splattered blonde German youth, his face etched in agony and his fist tightly clenched in rigor mortis. He also suffered, this enemy of mine. This rescue of the Lost Battalion is classified by the United States Army as one of the 10 most dramatic battles in United States Army history. In mid-March of 1945, the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion, of which I was a member, crossed the French border near Saarbrücken and entered Germany. We had been detached from the rest of the 442nd, which was sent back to Italy while we went into Germany. The German army by then had made a hasty retreat into the interior section of Germany following the Allied invasion of the country. We were moving so fast behind them that we sometimes had to move our bulky howitzers several times a day. As we approached the vicinity of the snow-covered fields of Dachau, Germany in late 1945, just prior to the end of end of the European theater war, we unexpectedly witnessed the most gruesome and pitiful sight I have ever experienced. Hundreds and hundreds of emaciated, gaunt, malnourished people in the black and white prison clothing. Their eyes were sunken and the cheeks hollow. They were literally living skeletons wandering aimlessly around the countryside. Many were collapsed in the snow-covered ground, unable to walk another step. We saw several prisoners shred what appeared to be either a dead horse or a cow and eat the flesh raw. Who are these people and what are they doing here? We asked each other. Regardless, as men of goodwill anyway would have done, we tried to help them as much as possible, offering them whatever food, clothing, water, and medicine we had, as well as words of kindness, comfort, and compassion. In their faces, we saw appreciation, for they had been subjugated by the Germans for weeks, days, and perhaps even months, and even years. There were a few English-speaking prisoners with whom we spoke. We learned that many of the prisoners were Jewish, others were political prisoners, whatever that meant at that time. They had been housed in a number of slave camps scattered around the Dachau area. Prisoners had been forced to work in a number of factories, including ammunition and airplane production houses. It is important to note here, however, that the Dachau area was slave camps and they were not extermination camps, as we probably think about Auschwitz and Treblinka. As the Allied forces approached these camps, the German guards had herded the prisoners out of the compounds and started them on a death march of sorts toward the hinterlands of Germany. As the Allies came closer, the German guards fled, abandoning these prisoners. These were the prisoners we had stumbled upon. Historians don't agree as to how come they were on a death march, but they come up with three theories. First is that they were marched toward the Swiss border, which is not too far away, so that Germans could make the last-ditch stand, and these prisoners were supposed to build a fortification for the stand. A second theory holds that these prisoners were marched toward the Swiss border so that they could be exchanged for Allied prisoners. And thirdly, and the most logical one seems to be, is that they were being marched away from the concentration camps so that they could erase all evidence of the atrocities. That afternoon, after we had pitched our tents, many of us entered one of the nearby camps, which was then completely deserted. There are many such camps in the Dachau area. Upon entering the compound and into the barracks, we were overpowered by the stench of feces, stench of urine, and above all, the acrid air of incarcerated matters. It was unbearable beyond description. Even right now, I smell it. I quickly ran out after a few minutes, perhaps, retching. Several of my comrades, however, with stronger constitution, bravely wandered about the compound. They observed what appeared to be huge ovens, which were still warm. Beside the ovens were several 50-gallon drums filled with ashes. Again, the ashes were still warm. Some of the even braver souls wandered behind the barracks, where they saw what they thought was cordwood neatly stacked on a railroad flatbed. Upon closer scrutiny, these were not cordwoods. These were human corpses. How can such inhumane treatment be inflicted upon a fellow human being? But apparently it was. One of the greatest ironies of World War II occurred there when members of a persecuted minority, the Japanese Americans, many of whose families were still interned in the United States, reaching out to help members of another persecuted minority, the Jewish people of Europe. These two minority groups were victims of two of the most blatant disregard of civil liberties ever perpetrated by any government upon its people. And the only crimes, one for being Jewish and the other for being Japanese. You know, one of the guys that we actually helped was this guy called Soliganor. He's an Israeli writer. And I first met him in 1994 in Japan when he and I were both there to honor the memory of Senpo Sugihara. Some of you may know him as the Japanese Schindler who helped over 6,000 Jews with transit visas. And they went over from Lithuania to Russia to Japan, ultimately to safety to Shanghai. Well, at any rate, they were there to honor the memory of Senpo Sugihara. And at that time, Soliganor related this. He said as a 17-year-old Jewish kid out of Lithuania, he was led out of Dachau, and he was sitting on the snow-covered grounds of Dachau, ready to, in his word, ready to pass away. Then along came a jeep with 4 strange-looking guys. He thought, oh, hey, maybe these are Japanese. And sure enough, he spoke a little English. So they jumped out of the jeep, put him on a jeep and took him to headquarters company where they nursed him until he was able to go and resume his march. And he recounts this in his book called Light One Candle, and he credits the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion for saving his life. Then, several years ago, after he had completed his book, he came to Hawaii, and I met him, and several of the 522 boys had a great reunion with him, and one of the guys there was a Sugimura from Hilo, who happened to be the jeep driver. So these two had a tearful reunion, and one of us asked Sugimura, how come you remember Solly? He said, how can you not remember him? Because he was one solid-looking guy. That's true, you know. During the past several years, I have often visited the University of Hawaii and many high schools as well as other organizations to share my Dachau experience. To my dismay, to my considerable dismay, I have been very often asked this question: did this terrible thing called the Holocaust actually happen? Isn't this a massive Jewish conspiracy and you Japanese have now joined the Jewish people? The detractors seem to ask, how can a rational man reconcile the atrocities associated with the so-called enlightened civilized society of the German Republic? This is what they seem to be asking. My answer to these detractors is simply this. It happened. I know because I was a witness. It not only happened, it was worse. It was beyond description. So, ladies and gentlemen, what does it all mean? Have we learned from history? What do we do to prevent future Holocausts from occurring? If we idly stand by, current Holocausts occurring around the world will likely continue. We, therefore, all of us, should and must have the conviction and the courage of the conviction to embrace greater compassion, understanding, and tolerance in our daily lives, even though it may not be a popular thing to do. Conversely, we must eschew hatred, bigotry, discrimination, and prejudice simply because others are different from us. Is such a philosophy idealistic? Certainly it is. Is it realistic? Perhaps. But the world will never be a better place if we don't try. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, let us all begin at once our quest for peace and goodwill toward men. We are, after all, our brother's keepers, are we not? Thank you.